All right, you can sit back down. We've got 20 minutes. I can talk really fast. Where I want to start a conversation with you about CMJ is that the kind of thing you heard tonight and will hear all day tomorrow, this is the only commercial. This is a commercial of sorts. All of that is part of a pattern of ministry that's designed to do one thing, is to make disciples. Now, CMJ has a particular calling to bring the discipleship of Jesus the Messiah to the Jewish people so that they ultimately fulfill their calling to be a light to the nations. Have you all heard that phrase, a light to the nations? It comes from Isaiah 49. Isaiah 49. I'm American too. We aren't all Americans. We're mostly English, honest. You're just hearing the Americans tonight. And CMJ, from its beginning, CMJ here in the UK in 1809, and actually we started in Israel in 1823. By the way, we started in England, in London, in 1809 as a gathering of evangelical leaders who were concerned about the Jewish people coming into the UK. Guess where we went by 1810? Edinburgh. We established our first couple of auxiliary committees, did a couple in England, and then came to Edinburgh and Glasgow. Of course, a couple decades later, there's a whole movement of concern for the Jewish people in Scotland, and they sort of pushed us out, but it was one of those times when the Scots could push the English out, everybody loved it. No, not really. What happened was we weren't needed here in the same way. Didn't really come back until about 2000 when Kelvin, who you will hear tomorrow and didn't hear last night, we'll hear tomorrow, and Jane, who mans the book table, began to bring some CMJ work back here. The important point is, though, that all of us who were in CMJ started under a banner in 1809 that described what it was we do. We were a society for the promotion of the gospel amongst the Jewish people. Now, that sounds perhaps a little too simple than it actually is. And so what I'm going to tell you about tonight is the sort of way we go about it, so you understand a bit about who we are and do it fairly quickly. We can repeat it tomorrow if you have questions. If you want to know more of the history, by the way, the fellow way in the back there has 2 workshops tomorrow. His name is Kelvin. He's hard to understand because he's from Australia, but he'll give you a much bigger dose of the history. So in his workshop tomorrow, 2 workshops tomorrow afternoon. So the church's ministry among Jewish people is the last of a series of names that began with the Society for the Promotion of the Gospel amongst the Jews. That was our first name. Our second name was the London Jews Society. Our third name was the Christian Mission to the Jews. And our fourth was the church's ministry among Jewish people. And you can see how the progression has gone from then to now as Christendom waned and secular life increased. Our purpose is, you can go to the next slide, Esther. This is how we do our work. We do our work as communities of faith, communities of disciples. We pointedly do not use the word believers, because as I think you heard from David, and as we understand from using the whole of the Bible, it's really not enough just to be a believer, just like it's not enough just to remember an idea. Scripturally, it's an idea that we live out in our lives. And we do things in Israel together. We worship, we work, and in those 2 processes, we also bear witness, a witness that produces eventually conversations. Now, we're not exclusively a ministry among Jewish people because Israel is full of Ethiopians and Gypsies and Arabs, some Muslim, some Christian, most Muslim, some Christian, and a whole variety of Jewish people. And if you want to hear more about that, you can come to my workshops tomorrow afternoon. But the point is, this is what we do. And this is really, in one way or another, what every CMJ unit does around the world, whether it's here in the UK, for the 293,000 Jewish people in this land, but the whole of the UK, or it's in America, where there's 5 million Jewish people, or in Australia, where there's a handful, or in Canada, where there's 500,000. The need's the same, but the Jewish people live among other people, And when the gospel goes out, other people hear. Anyway, so next slide, Esther. This is one of the ways in which it's very clear to all the people around us in other communities. Israel is a land of communities. Now, we've been there long enough. We've been there 200 years. That we're recognized as a community. We're the English folks in the old city. And we're the Christian English folks. And we've been there long. We've been there since, with the building and land, since 1833. But there's other communities. There's the Syrian Orthodox, and there's the Latin Patriarchate, and there's the Hasidic Jews, and the Haredi Jews, and the secular Jewish people, and there's the Muslims. There are communities. In Scotland, is the church seen as a community? Well, Jews have always been a community, and historically the people of God were always a community, and that community has the capacity, by the way it lives together, to bear witness. So, we have communities of worship. We host and encourage Messianic believers in their worship. More about that in a moment. And we're also now expanding our ability to create a community onto the worldwide network, particularly around us. We have an Arabic service every Thursday night that has already seen 2 Muslim people come to faith. It's broadcast all over the region in the Middle East around us every Thursday night, which is sort of like Friday night for Gentiles. That's the beginning of their day of worship the next day. Next slide. And we operate businesses for 2 reasons. Those businesses become the front door to some of our ministries, but we also support ourselves as much as we can, and we're looking probably towards a future in which that'll be even more necessary. So we have guest houses, we have coffee shops, we have gift shops. We do work, and we serve people like Sharon, who brought a bunch of folks, and any of you who want to come see us. We serve Christians who come. We help them become better disciples by the kind of teaching you heard. But we also serve non-believing Jewish people who come for coffee. They don't all come for coffee. Some come for our museums. Some come to see what we are. Some come just to have coffee. And occasionally some come to stay overnight. We do host with kind of a serious intention now through the things that we can do right now, speaking of Jerusalem. We have other places. I'll get to that in a moment. For instance, last summer, we had an event. It was a group of Jewish believers playing Persian music on original instruments. And 150 people showed up and danced in the driveway. We do that kind of stuff because it creates a doorway of friendship from our community to the people around us. And we do something through our Mercy Fund, which actually was originally David's idea out of Christ Church in Jerusalem, where we do extensive works of mercy among the communities around us, whatever they are. So, for instance, we advocate for the gypsies, who are at the very bottom of Israeli society. We've promoted work among the Ethiopians. In fact, we were in Ethiopia ourselves for 100 years. So the Ethiopian community, the Beta Jews, as they're known, is pretty near the bottom of the social order and often have struggled figuring out how to connect themselves to social systems, or if they're injured or harmed, how to work within the legal system. So we have lawyers, we have social service people, we provide food, and we provide sometimes just fellowship and comfort and care, like we do for Holocaust survivors when they come for lunch once or twice a year. So it's this mix, this holistic mix of things that we are at work, that all together show from our community to the communities around us, this is what it's like to live together if you're disciples of the Messiah. Now, I'd be a liar if I said we did it perfectly. We have our struggles, we have our arguments. I often say to people, until I went to Israel 4 years ago, I thought I was a reasonable person who never got upset or cranky. I've been cranky more days in Israel than I have any other time in my life. But of course, that's because it's spiritually challenging. And that's part of the reason why it's good to be there. But always, you know, the moment you set forth to do those things that will bring honor to the Lord, it always stretches you spiritually, doesn't it? And so, whether we want it or not, we get stretched. But the results are people who walk in for our coffee, and our coffee is reputedly the best in the old city of Jerusalem, but I was in the restaurant business. I'm not so sure. It's good coffee. And you'll enjoy it when you come, but sometimes we got to be careful how many boasts we make. But they'll come in, and we have a garden behind the coffee shop and a pergola where people can sit. And folks who speak to them and volunteers who come from abroad who are believers who serve them. And they'll say again and again, there's something about this place, I just don't understand what it is that's so special. It's not us. We're just trying. We're not fully succeeding. What it is, our efforts bring down the presence of God among us, and that's who they feel. Now, we have provision for explaining to them who it is and why that's happening, and that's one of the other things we do next. Our witness. We have a very unusual benefit for ourselves in the land because we were the first Protestant group of folks who came, because we spearheaded, though not alone, a number of things that were done for the Jewish people to protect them in times of persecution when they were under the Ottoman Turks, Muslim Ottoman Turks, because we helped them establish themselves in the land, and eventually we weren't so involved in the coming of the land of the current government in Israel, but we were involved in the beginning of Israel becoming recognized as a people group in the land. All of those things become a point of interest for a new nation that is interested in its history. Now, I come from a much younger country than you do, and I lived here for 10 years, so I've kind of seen the differences. Imagine if Scotland had only begun as a society 70 years ago, and the Scottish people had been all over the world and were finally regathered here in Scotland. Every piece of your history in the land would be extremely important to you. Not that there aren't plenty that are already. I used to work for an archbishop who was a Scot, and his hero was Braveheart. So I memorized the book. But every culture has its heroes, you know. And for the Jewish people who are part of the land, secular, not so much religious, but occasionally religious, maybe more and more often, they come into our museum to find out a part of their own history they don't know, because it's not taught in school books. And then they'll talk to our guides, some of whom are Messianic believers, others of whom are Gentile believers, and they'll say, so why did you come to do this? And then they'll say, you're Jewish, aren't you? What do you believe? You see how it works? Step by step, they ask the questions, and by the way we live and by the way we put our life together there, we begin to have the opportunity to give answers. Now, I suspect, because I've been doing this kind of work other places much of my life, that the whole world now is turning into a place where followers of Jesus, disciples of Jesus, need to understand how to be communities of faith for whom their work together, their worship together, and their witness together is essential for the next wave of the gospel going forward, and wholeness and spiritual health being brought back to a broken world. Anyway, next slide. We're in 4 places. Upper right is we have 3 large compounds. One is the one in Jerusalem. It's just inside Jaffa Gate, which is the main gate to the old city. Upper left is we've been in Jaffa. Jaffa used to be called Joppa in the Bible. So where our property is there, well, nobody knows exactly where Jonah left for Nineveh, but he left from Jaffa. But we know that we're only a few hundred yards from the house on which Peter prayed when the sheet was let down for him in Acts. There's not a whole lot other than that in Jaffa. There's a few things that people come to tour, but we're only a few blocks. We bought a building in 1926, after which it was promptly taken over by the British Mandate Police, and they gave it back to us a decade or something later. I don't remember the exact date. It's a guest house. It has a small coffee shop. It has a small museum like we have in Jerusalem. The lower left is a prayer center up in the Galilee, a town called Migdal. It's not in the midst of things like the other 3 places we have, but it's a place people go for prayer and sometimes for study, and we're now looking at how we can enhance its ministry. And then on the lower right is the Anglican International School in Jerusalem. It was originally the first modern hospital in all of Israel, and it was built by donors to CMJ with names like Cadbury. And it provided the first hospitals in those days were built in wings if they were modern, so the fresh air could blow across the wards, not in big blocks, no aircon, of course. That school, eventually Israel didn't need hospitals after the 1948 war. They turned it back over to us in the early 50s, and from sometime late in the 1950s, early 1960s, we started a school called the Anglican International School in Jerusalem. It has a core of Christian teachers. Most of our students are not believers. Rosemary Saunders, who's right back there as well, she has a workshop tomorrow that can tell you about the school and its witness. It's now about 300 students. It's the premier college university preparation school in the city, which gives us a great opportunity. Two is a large property, and it too is something that we're steadily working on to build a community that bears witness. So, last of all, for a long time we've only been in those four places, but over the course of some prayerful discernment during COVID, it became clear to us there are other places we need to go. So we're in the two largest cities, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, but Beersheba, that's Abraham's city down in the desert, it's exploding with growth, as is Haifa, which is sort of the tech center of Israel. And so over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, our plans, Lord willing, are to bring our work in Tel Aviv up to the same quality and complexion of work that we do in Jerusalem. It probably has 2 or 3 times the potential in terms of ministry and mission as Jerusalem does, because Jerusalem and the old city where we are is really a place where Christians like to come, and ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, not your average Jewish person who's secular. And then eventually we'll move on to Tiberias and Beersheba. Last slide. The thing that I guess I want to emphasize is to come back to this idea of community and perhaps prompt you to think of this in your own terms. At Christ Church and also down in Jaffa, we have worshiping communities in 2 or 3 languages, in Hebrew and in English and sometimes in Arabic. Arabic now in Jerusalem, not yet in Jaffa. And we've realized that everywhere we go, we need to have communities that worship, because a community that worships make a statement to the community around it. You know, the idea of being at worship on Sunday or Shabbat says to everybody around you, this is part of my identity. This is who I am. It's not just a consumer choice that I feel like it today. It is part of our statement of who we are as a community of faith. We do humanitarian and social outreach, the Mercy Fund, and that will always be part of what we do because it is emphasized so often and so strongly by the prophets and by the apostles that it's something we cannot leave out, any more than we can leave out explaining to people who Yeshua, Jesus, is. We will always have heritage centers that will talk about what Protestant evangelical believers did for the land of Israel, because it's not only is it a way of helping them understand that we're committed to the land as well, and that we're a community in the land, it creates the opportunity for authentic relationships around a real history that really happened. And finally, our continuing work in hospitality, though we have to do a few other things given the fact that every 10 years there's a war and the tourists stop coming. That hospitality is another way in which a barista or a receptionist or a volunteer who's filled with the Holy Spirit has the potential to open a door to feelings of care and concern as people take whatever they're eating or drinking and walk in to sit down, or their dishes are cleared and there's a greeting. So that's who we are. We're here we're here mostly to provide teaching. We have a table over there, as does all our colleagues from CMJ UK. We're all about the same work, and we're all about it because we were called to it. And believers supposed to be, there are other callings, but this for us is a calling not just to the Jewish people, but most of all, to bring the Jewish people to where they can fulfill their calling, which we'll talk about some more tomorrow in my seminar if you come. You know, why is it done this way? Why did the Lord decide to create a people who must become a witness themselves so that the rest of us, and some of this, of course, already happened, can be the kind of witnesses and communities of witness that we need to be. So I think we'll stop there since it's warm and late. I want to thank you all. You know, I was planning to start the first time I talked tonight by saying how grateful I was to come someplace that was cold, wet, and cloudy. Because it's been like 36 degrees today in Jerusalem. But my goodness, look what you did. Anyway, I don't think we should, are you wrapping up? Okay, well, I'm going to pray is what I'm going to do. So why don't you stand with me? You know, one of the things, there's a funny line I've heard, I'm not sure it's true, that historically Jewish people stand in God's presence and Gentiles used to kneel. But I think he'll accept the fact that we stand in honor of him as we come before him. So Father in heaven, we thank you that you've gathered a group of disciples who care about your people, who care about your land, but most of all who care to follow your Son and obey him. All of us bless you and thank you for our redemption and gratefully honor you that you care to live among us, that you want to be with us, and you care enough about our best selves and our best way to live that you've called us to holiness. And so tonight as we go to rest and return tomorrow, prepare us to hear your word, prepare us to know your will, and prepare us most of all to be able to obey. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.